If you're going to make or drink wine, knowing what fruits can be poisonous is going to be super important. And some of these fruits might really surprise you. Today I'll cover some of the most common fruits. If I forgot something, which I'm sure I did, make sure you mention in the comments below. I think everybody would like to know that. In most cases, it's going to be the seeds or the pits that are going to be kind of dangerous here. And you're not eating those, so maybe you're not really thinking about that. But when we make wine, it's not uncommon to ferment on the skins and seeds in an intentionally extractive process. Like if you make red wine, we're intentionally trying to extract as much color and body basically from those skins and to some extent from those seeds. The seeds, while they sometimes get a bad rap, they do contribute quite a bit to the character of that wine. So you can see if you're extracting from a seed or a skin that contains essentially a poison, that's going to be a bad thing. The first category, and probably the most common, are going to be your stone fruits. So these are going to be the fruits that have a pit. That's going to include things like cherries, plums, peaches, apricots, nectarines. So these particular fruits in the pits contain something called amygdalin. And when amygdalin enters your body and begins to kind of process through your organs, it can create hydrogen cyanide. And of course, we know that is super poisonous. In this category, I'm also going to throw your apples and pears. They contain the same thing, but of course they don't have pits, they have seeds. Now, if you were to eat these things, you swallow a couple of seeds, it's probably not that big of a deal because the seeds do kind of contain a coating so that your body can't really get that bad stuff out of them. Maybe you'll get a little sick, especially if you crunch them, but you start soaking those in a solution with alcohol that can extract well, you could potentially make a wine that's gonna get you pretty sick, if not worse. So be careful when fermenting with these fruits. And again, I mentioned these are all super common, especially in the home winemaking world. I think apples are probably the most common fruit to make wine of, aside from grapes. So if you're gonna make wine from these, which you can, just make sure you're not fermenting on the seeds. So you can either press before fermenting and ferment on the juice, like you're gonna do in most cases with apple wine, or you can, manually separate the pits. So if you're making things from peaches, don't just kind of squish them up and put them in there. Make sure you're getting those pits out of there before you actually start fermenting. So maybe you might have known about those last couple, but this next one kind of surprised me, and that is mangoes. Mango skins contain something called urushiol, if I'm pronouncing that right. Now that is the toxin found in poison ivy. If you were to consume this toxin, it could damage your airway, your digestive tract, your kidneys, as well as other organs. So obviously, you don't want to eat the toxin that makes you itchy from poison ivy. If you've ever got poison ivy, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. This stuff will mess you up. So if you're gonna make mango wine, just make sure you peel it. You only ferment the actual fruit, the pulp, not the skins. In Jamaica, there's a popular fruit called Ackee. If it's not processed right, or especially if it's underripe, contains something called hypoglycin. And hypoglycin, when consumed, can cause something called Jamaican vomiting sickness. It can just mess you up, put you over the toilet. In severe cases, it could cause death. So it's not something you want to really mess with if you're not familiar with it, if you're not processing it right, if you're not making sure it's fully ripe. And a lot of these fruits, once they're fully ripe, these toxins can kind of diminish or get down to a more safe level. Now, if we're talking about wine though, you're kind of concentrating things. So I like to kind of play on the side of caution. Lychee, which is common in Asia, also has this same toxin found in Ackee. When it's underripe, it's much higher. So personally, I probably wouldn't even make wine from these fruits. If you do, just make sure you know what you're doing and are very familiar with the risks and are doing it in a safe way. Somewhere out there, a YouTuber needs your help. You can help tremendously by liking, subscribing, and going to patreon.com/makewine and watching incredible wine-related content for the low price of just $2 a month. I have a tree in my backyard. It's called a Pawpaw tree. Some call it a hipster banana. It was a favorite fruit of George Washington. It's an incredible fruit. It's super tropical, but it grows in northern climates. This fruit does have a couple surprises up its sleeve though. You'll notice that it has really no natural pests, and I think the big reason of that is because the skin contains a poison. It's called annonacin, and it's actually toxic to your nervous system. Now, you don't really want to mess with anything like that. If you've ever accidentally taken a little small bite of the skin of a pawpaw, you won't take another bite. It is so insanely bitter. So I think in nature, there's kind of a mechanism to kind of get you to not eat that stuff. But in wine, I could see you just kind of smashing it all up and putting it in there like a red wine. And now you're kind of extracting this thing, and it could seriously cause some damage to your nervous system. So make sure you're just scooping the pulp. You're not using the skins. What I always say is, when in doubt, scoop it out. It's always those skins and seeds that it seems like are gonna get you. And actually, the seeds, which actually look like pits in a pawpaw, also contain this compound. Star fruits, sometimes you see these at the Chinese buffet, and also rhubarb leaves, which I know aren't a fruit, but people make strawberry rhubarb things, so I'll mention it anyways. They contain oxalates, which can be bad for your kidneys. Now, these are gonna be worse if you're just eating these like crazy straight up versus if they've gone through a fermentation process, but something to keep in mind, especially if you have some sort of kidney disorder. The silver lining with all of these is that fermentation, in a similar way to cooking, is going to, in most cases, greatly reduce these toxins. It could reduce them as much as maybe 80%. But what's tricky is, if you're fermenting on the skins and seeds, you're actually extracting like crazy. You're extracting a lot more than you would be if you were just eating these fresh fruits. So you're bringing the levels up, and then the fermentation will bring them back down. There's some worst case scenarios though, where you might ferment on the skins and the seeds, and then you might actually intentionally stall out that wine to preserve some residual sugar. So that's kind of probably the worst case scenario. So something to keep in mind if you're gonna, make wine from these fruits, but you should never really get there because you should never be really using the seeds and the skins of these particular fruits. If you've ever got sick from one of these fruits, I'd love to hear about it. I always hear about how you have to be careful with things like apple seeds, peach pits, but I've never really heard of somebody getting, sick from these things. I just want to know, is it out there happening? Is this a huge quiet thing happening below the radar that nobody's talking about because they're embarrassed? Who knows? I hope this video is helpful for you, and thanks for watching.